Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making Ghetto Tech House drums inspired by Cloonee's song Sippin Yak. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 30 minutes using the 80-20 rule of tech house drum production. What you're listening to right now is the track that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to focus on this drum group right here, and we're going to do things in the actual order that I created each layer, so you can kind of follow along when you're building out your own tech house drums. I'm going to be showing you how you can quickly get to a professional quality level using only 20% of the effort by working with a reference track like you can see right here to quickly guide your decisions, as well as slashing a whole bunch of time off of your effort and mixing as you go by using powerful templates like you can see here, Ableton racks, and one knob effects. Make sure you stick around till the end because we'll be doing a full recap of the 80-20 rule at that point. All in all, these drums took me about 25 to 30 minutes to create, and as you can see here, this track has been completely arranged, mixed, mastered, and is ready to go, which only took me about 5 or 6 hours to complete. So if you want help finishing songs faster just like this, I've made you a free bundle of template samples and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Visit the link that is on screen now or in the description to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So the first thing that I usually build out when creating drums is the kick drum. So let's take a look at that first. So first thing is having a look at the pattern. So it's just kind of your classic 4 on the floor kick pattern with like a little trick at the end right here. It's almost like a little fill that happens at the end of every 2 bars. In addition to that, there's also kind of this extended kick that happens, which is kind of cool. So normally they're a bit tighter, and then there's that one that's almost like part of the fill where there's like a longer, more sustained kick happening. Kind of part of the fill there, which is kind of interesting. Something a little new that I haven't really tried before. That's it. Moving on from the note selection. The next main thing is the sound selection. So what we have here is we sampled the kick drum from the actual Cloonee Sippin Yak track. So right here you can see there's an Ableton Simpler device, and the full track is in there, and basically just found a spot, in this instance, kind of the end. So when doing this, you want to look for, ideally, like have the reference track in your project and then have an extended mix so you can grab from the intro or the outro. That's where you can find usually a kick that's nice and clean. That's it. Another big tip there is if you look here, we do have this Cloonee, or I don't even know how you said that name, but it's in there as a reference track, and I've mapped the solo button so that when I press it, I can flick back and forth between mine and the reference track. And so real quick, the idea is to grab a little slice, throw it into an Ableton Simpler, and then what I did is created this rack here called the R kick, reference kick, and it just has a bunch of macros set up so you don't have to do deep diving into Simpler. One of the main things is setting the filter frequency, so removing a bunch of the high end. You can see here, rolled it down to 752 Hertz. But with that said, you also need to make sure that you turn on this filter to envelope feature. So if I turn this off, then that low pass filter is acting like a normal low pass filter, and you're kind of removing way too much of the information. But you do want to remove it because actually that sounds pretty good, but it still sounds there's a bunch of other information going on there. So the idea is you roll it down, bring up that filter envelope, and you're getting that nice kind of punchy kick sound to really be able to isolate that kick nicely. But that said, I usually also increase the volume to velocity. Normally it's around 30%. This just makes that hit a little bit harder. And there's a bunch of other macros here, but in this case, all I'm really doing is I played with the release a little bit to tighten up the sound, and then also added in a bit of a high shelf filter here, just to remove some of the low end, the high end, in a way that's a little bit more natural than your common low pass filter. With that said, I did do some other extra little tricks here. So that's one thing, like you want to get the note selection right, then you want to get the sound selection right. That's really going to be a big shortcut there. And then also one thing I did was I added on this drum bus, because without it, so if we listen to this, and then compare it to the reference. It sounds close, but it felt like it was missing some kind of body. So I added in this drum bus, added a bit of drive, dampened it to 3000 or 3 kilohertz here, increased the transient a bit so it's a little bit punchier, and then increase the boom all the way, and it's at F sharp. I'm not 100% sure if this is in key, but the idea is you do want, potentially, if you're shaping the kick drum, sometimes it could be good to have it in key. You don't always want it to be in the exact key of the song, so if the song is in F sharp, you might not want to have your kick in F sharp, because then there could be clashing frequencies, but it can be a good idea to have them in the similar scale so that it's harmonically makes sense. In this case, I just tuned this frequency here to ear and then dialed back the decay a little bit, so it adds a little bit more of that boominess in the low end to the kick that I feel like it was missing, and then just dialed in the dry and wet there. So other than that, the main thing though when building this out against the reference track is the volume. So let's have a listen. I think it's pretty close. Mine might even be a little bit louder, but that's really one of the big tricks right off the bat here. Getting the notes correct, getting the volumes correct, and getting the sound selection correct. That's going to kind of be one of the biggest keys to the 80-20 rule here. Other than that, should mention that these things like the R kick and all the other channel strip and one knob effects that you're going to see are available in the project file. So if you'd like to download this project file, you can grab all that with the link in the description. With that said, once the kick's done, usually I'm going to move over to snare or hi-hats. In this instance, I did the hi-hats next because it's pretty minimal in terms of the drums, I would say, in this tune. So let's stop yapping and show you those hi-hats. And let's flick to the reference. So you can hear it's kind of like a cool, very subtle, kind of skippy hi-hat kind of pattern. And so what I did was, usually I'll start with this. So it's like the offbeat, kind of classic hi-hat sound and position that you'll usually hear. It kind of drives the track forward. So I'll usually start with that. So I found one sound here. Just flick between the different sounds that I have. I set up this rack so it's like a little selector, so you can move this to change the sounds as you're flicking back and forth between yours and the reference so that you can find the right sound. And then kind of started off with that kind of anchor main kind of hi-hat, and then reinforced it here with an additional hi-hat, doing a little bit of play here. So if you see at the bottom, there's some velocities going on this second hi-hat, and then also some randomization, so that it's playing slightly different velocities each time. Just adds a little bit to like the groove and changing things up a little bit. Other than that, the main thing is, then I kind of added that skippy kind of element here, and that kind of adds that cool groove and that shuffle. And then I use different hi-hat sounds. It just kind of keeps things interesting. Doesn't sound as straight or rigid. Kind of gives like a more of a humanized playing feel, and I think just sounds more interesting. And other than that, the main thing when building out the hi-hats like this is, it might look a little complex, but usually I'll build out the first bar or two, and then I'll copy and paste that over, and then make a slight adjustment. So you can see kind of near the end, Phil, things are slightly different. And just kind of creates a call and response and makes things sound a little bit dynamic and changing and different over time. So let's look at the pattern. Next up is the sound. So there's just all these different drum samples that I've found, saved to a library. That's a key there as well. Like building out, you don't want to have to sift through a massive library of hi-hat sounds every time. So if you can build out a suite of hi-hat sounds, particularly against a reference track that you like, it's going to make things a lot quicker for you when you're building out your drums. Other than that, I'm running into my standard channel strip that allows me to very quickly mix as you go. So what I'm doing is just removing a bunch of the low here. Then we're running it into a transient designer, which is a free transient shaper here. And I just mapped some of the main macros so I can just more quickly access them, use my eyes more than my ears, or use my ears more than my eyes rather. And I'm increasing the attack so there's just a little bit more. The transient's being emphasized on the hi-hat, so it's a little bit tighter and punchier sounding, I would say. Then I'm running it into this one knob sidechain, which is just Ableton Saturator, driving this up, which is filling out the sound of the hi-hat a bit. And then that's really it there. So again, main thing is flicking back and forth. making sure the notes, sound selection, and volumes are correct. Next thing I added in was this snare, so let's have a look and listen to that. As well as this little fill. Okay, so other than that, main thing is it's just like a snare on the classic position for snares and claps. It's on the 2 and the 4 within the beat, and then flicking back and forth. It's a cool kind of like sampled snare for sure. I didn't hear any claps, so I focus on the snare. Just flick between my sounds here, using that or the selector to figure out like a similar sound. And that's really it. Then other kind of processing going on here, classic stuff with the channel strip, removing some of the lows very quickly. I actually set this so that the 200 Hz is always cut at this point, which is kind of a classic move I usually do for anything except for like the kick and the bass elements. And this way it's just automatically happening and you can just make quick adjustments. You don't have to always do the moves that you're doing all the time. You can set up your channel strips, you can set up your devices like this, default devices, so that they're ready to go. I guess quick tip, I can show you how you do that. So you just like on any of these devices, you right click it and you press save as default preset. And every time you load an EQ8 in this example, it would have this cut already built in. Other than that, we're just running into a little bit of Ableton Saturator to fill out the snare sound a little bit, add a bit more of that cool kind of like vintage undergroundy grit to it as well. Next up is this open hi-hat sound. Let's have a look at the pattern. So this is kind of reinforcing that the other closed hats, there's a little bit of velocity going on here, so there's some kind of humanization happening. I think if you listen back and forth between this and the reference, there's not as much of a presence of this kind of sound, but as when building up the track, I wanted it in there, so I added this in. So it's just kind of re-emphasizing that main driving hi-hat sound. And then I set it up so that as more of an arrangement trick, if you fly over here, you can see the light colored open hi-hat, and over here there's a darker colored yellow, and that just kind of opens things up. So I'm going to just show you what that sounds like here. More closed. More open. So what I did was just copy that sound over to another spot in the drum rack, and then just opened up the sample here. So let me go back to where we were. So I picked a sound I liked, and then there's a little bit of some processing going on here. So what I did do was I tightened up the sample kind of endpoint, which tightens up the sound quite a bit. And actually, let me double check something here. I want to see, did I do that at all? Okay, I did do it maybe a little bit also in those closed hat situations here, you can see. Just, I feel like really the sound here is really kind of super tight. And so playing with either the release or the end sample times is going to tighten up the sounds quite a bit. With that said, let's have a look at any processing. So going into the same channel strip as usual, things were super quick, removing a bunch of the lows, adding in some saturation to fill out the sound a bit. And then I do have this one knob width plugin, which is a free plugin called Wider. Again, I just mapped the common knobs, so it's super quick. And I just dialed in the mono a bit because I wanted the sound to kind of be a little bit more in the center and have less of a stereo sound for this open hi-hat. Then usually once I have built out kind of the core elements, using MIDI, so things like the kick, the hi-hats, the snares, open hats, the core sounds of the drums. Usually what I like to do is then reinforce that with different top loops or drum breaks, those kind of things to add some more groove and texture and something interesting to the sound. So let's have a listen to some of the tops that I added. It's a bit of a weird one. I want to solo this actually. So a lot of that is, there's this cool kind of like minimal house, kind of weird glitchy-ish sounds I noticed going on in the track. So I wanted to emulate that. I looked up some minimal tops basically in Splice, found one I liked, dropped it in here, did a little bit of cutting things up. And then also, I think if we go to the envelopes, did I do anything funky? Yeah. So there's also this weird like kind of harmonic synth sound that came in at these points here. So I jumped into envelope, switched to clip and gain, and then brought that down so it doesn't come out as much. Little trick there that you can do to kind of customize your top loops and your drum breaks so that sounds that you don't like aren't coming through, basically. What I did is then I ran this into Tantra and just found like a cool preset, to be completely honest. This is like a really sweet plugin. I want to wait for it when it's on sale, because then it's like $30 or something. And then it's a really quick like shortcut into getting that cool, minimal, interesting sound. Then removing a whole bunch of the lows, making sure it's not interfering with anything else. Using the transient shaper to remove some of the attacks. Some of the transients were really poking through and kind of sounded annoying, so I ducked that down. And then using some one knob sidechain. So the way that I like to use sidechain is mapping it to an Ableton shaper device with the kind of like the I guess contour of sidechain compression there, mapped to a quarter note, because usually the kick is playing quarter notes, and then just ducking volume. So that way it's just a lot easier. You just dial in one knob with the sidechain to get the pumping effect and move it away from the kick drum, instead of having to map out sidechain compression and all that kind of annoying crap. Then running it into quite a bit of Ableton Saturate to fill the sound a bit, and then this one knob width plugin to move things to the left and right a bit, add some stereo sound, keep the center free. Next thing I added in was this next top loops, which is the same thing, but with a little bit less cut ups. So let's add that in. Freaking cool, but it's subtle. So let me solo it for you as well. So if you can hear that, really a lot about texture and this cool underwater vibe. And so it's the same sample, it's just cut up a little bit less, and running it into a different Tantra preset. And then something I do is sometimes brings down the mix a little bit, so some of the original samples coming through. So this is mixed down to 93% out of 100. Removing a bunch of the lows on this, a little bit of sidechain so it's pumping and moving out of the way of the kick, and that's really it there. Then the last thing that I added was this last little break. Which I think is pretty cool. Let's solo it out a little bit. Very subtle, but it's kind of adding some extra hi-hat, kind of open hat little grooves, some extra little kind of like snare kind of fills, and those little subtle things. It's very subtle. It's very much adding to the rest of everything. You can see the main core elements have been built out like by hand, and then using these things to add in a little bit of extra groove and character and like that extra little bit of polish and professionalism to the sound. So just found some cool break on splice, and then removed a bunch of the lows, removed some of the sustain so that the sound is a lot tighter. I usually like to bring back the sustain on the top loops too. I feel like that helps it blend in and let the core elements shine through a little bit more. Same thing with sidechain, adding that pumping sound, letting the other elements come through a bit more, and then some saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. I do wonder if I did, that's not the wrong one. I want to see, sometimes another trick here is to, when on beats mode, make sure it's on transients, switch it to this little bit here, and you can drag down the transients. Normally it's at 100, you can bring this down a bit. And then I'm also doing a little bit of clip automation here. So I was removing, there was kind of like a kick drum in this sound, and I've removed most of that kick drum with that clip envelope gain automation here. And sometimes it comes through, so it adds a little bit of like a fill and some kind of cool bounce to it. Yeah, that's a look at the drums. I'll do a quick run through of see if I did anything. I did do a little bit of work on the bus, which I'll get into. I'm gonna make a mixing and mastering video on this, but just a little bit of parallel compression, a little bit of saturation, and a little bit of clipping to cut off a bit of the tops of the transients there. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention, then you probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your drums. The goal here is to get 80% of the results with only 20% of the time, energy, or effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule for drums is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're effortlessly hitting 80% of a very professional sounding track. In particular, we focus on nailing the pattern, sound selection, and the volume compared to the reference track, so that we keep things fast and focused as we're building out our drums. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume as well as a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our drums. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and to build up a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later. And check out this playlist of videos where I remake drums from other songs from the Beatport top charts. Or if you want to take what you learned in this video to the next level, definitely check out this video right here.